In a quiet farming town, a bride had stood alone at the altar, abandoned, humiliated, called too old by the man who once promised her forever. Miles away, a grieving widower had been raising his son in silence, their home filled with loss and unspoken pain. When their paths crossed by chance, what started as simple shelter for a stranger became something deeper. But when her past came knocking and his fears resurfaced, they faced a choice that could either heal 3 broken hearts or shatter them for good. What happened next left the whole town in stunned silence. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The bouquet lay in the mud, wilted like the hope in her eyes as guests whispered and the pastor awkwardly cleared his throat at the empty altar. And Charlotte Fairchild, 39 and childless, dressed in ivory lace meant for joy, stood humiliated under the heavy skies, abandoned by a younger groom who had taken one look at the crowd's snickers and fled, calling her too old, too serious, not what he wanted anymore. And as her father hung his head in shame, and the church doors quietly closed behind her, she stumbled out with tear-stained cheeks and nowhere to go, her once promising life now a cruel punchline. Miles away, Daniel Clay stood at the edge of a cornfield in a patched shirt, calloused hands on his knees, staring at the dented headstone of a wife buried too young and the worn shoes of a 10-year-old son who hadn't smiled in months. And when the neighbor's boy asked if anyone would ever love them again, Daniel had no answer, only silence and a heart stitched together with grief, the barn falling apart behind him like his plans. Their paths crossed 2 days later at a roadside inn, where Charlotte sat with a packed suitcase in trembling hands, unsure whether to keep running or return to the town that pitied her. And Daniel, dusty from a long haul into town, stopped only for coffee but saw something in her eyes that mirrored his own loneliness, the same hollow ache of being left behind by time and people who swore they'd stay. He asked if she was all right, and she almost didn't answer. But then her voice cracked like a dried leaf as she told him everything, and he listened, not out of duty, but because he understood what it was to be shattered and still breathing. And when she confessed she had no home to return to, no job, no place she felt wanted, he nodded and said, "Then come with me." Not as a rescuer, not as a man with answers, but as someone who saw the same fracture in the mirror each morning. They drove back to his small, weathered farm in silence, a battered truck with a broken radio, the road winding like the uncertainty between them. And when she stepped onto his land, Charlotte felt the earth welcome her in a way no chapel ever had. And the boy, Eli, peeked from behind a shed, suspicious and silent until she crouched to his level and said, "I know what it means to lose someone." And something unspoken passed between them, a tentative truce. That night she slept in the guest room once used by Daniel's wife's dying mother, and though she cried into the pillow, it was a different kind of crying, softer, with flickers of purpose beneath the sorrow. Weeks passed like rain through dry soil, soaking life back into brittle routines, and while Daniel worked the fields, Charlotte began tending the home, not out of obligation, but from a desire to matter, to build again from the ruins. And Eli, guarded and quiet, began leaving drawings on her door, first crude stick figures, then a sketch of 3 people standing in a field with the sun above them and the caption, "Us." One evening, Daniel walked in covered in sweat and sorrow after the tractor finally gave out, and Charlotte stood beside him without words, handed him a towel and made him tea, her presence steady, unjudging, and something inside him shifted, not like lightning but like thawing ice. The town gossiped, of course, they always do, calling her the pity guest, whispering that he'd taken her in out of guilt, or worse, desperation, but neither of them spoke to it, because what grew between them didn't need defending, only tending like crops in spring. And yet conflict brewed when Eli's school held a mother-son lunch event, and the teacher, unaware, handed Charlotte a blank visitor's badge, pausing before asking awkwardly, "Are you?" And Charlotte looked at Eli, who looked down at his tray, cheeks flushed, and she said, "I'm Charlotte," not claiming a title she hadn't earned, but not denying the bond growing there either. And that night, Eli asked if she could help him with his reading homework, then asked if she could tuck him in. And as she pulled the covers up to his chin, he whispered, "You smell like someone who stays." And tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall until the door closed. Daniel saw the change too, the warmth Charlotte brought, the laughter returning to his boy, the way meals tasted better, the silence less heavy, but fear still lingered. What if she left like the others? What if he wasn't enough? What if he loved again only to lose again? And so he kept a polite distance. Until one night during a thunderstorm, when lightning knocked out the power in Charlotte, trembling from old memories of being locked outside during storms as a girl, found herself in Daniel's arms in the dark hallway. And he held her not out of pity, but because she was already in the center of his world and he hadn't realized it until then. Their lips met not as a promise but a question, and the answer came in the quiet morning after, with Eli bringing burnt toast and a drawing titled My Family, and 3 figures holding hands beneath a treehouse she hadn't even known existed. But peace never stays uncontested, and trouble arrived in the form of Charlotte's ex-fiancé, now shamed and seeking forgiveness, showing up at the farm gate with flowers and apologies, claiming he was pressured, confused that he made a mistake, and Daniel, who had seen war and watched death take things slowly, stood calmly and said, "This isn't a place for liars," but Charlotte stepped forward and said, "I wasn't too old, you were too weak," and shut the gate herself. Later, she confessed to Daniel that part of her still feared being abandoned, that maybe she wasn't enough, and he replied, "You didn't replace her. You saved us both." And that night, they danced slowly in the kitchen with no music, only the sound of Eli snoring upstairs and rain tapping gently on the tin roof. Months became seasons and the farm slowly healed. Repairs made not with money but care, and Charlotte planted a garden where the weeds used to grow, each flower a silent testament to choosing life again, and Eli's laughter filled the barn rafters where ghosts once slept. On Christmas morning, Daniel gave her a ring made from his late wife's necklace, reshaped not to erase the past but to honor it while forging something new. And when Charlotte said yes, it wasn't to a wedding but to a life, a messy, beautiful, redemptive life where love was no longer an echo but a presence. And when the new pastor asked if they wanted a big church ceremony, they said no. They'd marry under the treehouse Eli had drawn, with boots in the mud, family watching from hay bales, and the sun breaking through the clouds like grace itself. And as vows were spoken and Eli held both their hands, the town watched in stunned silence, not because of her age or his loss, or the gossip that once followed them, but because they had witnessed what most never do. The resurrection of hope in the arms of 2 people who had every reason to give up but chose, again and again, to stay.